Hello, everyone. It is so nice to see you all today. Over the last few years, we've witnessed a rapid shift towards hybrid and virtual formats for critical meetings, whether they're AGMs, investor updates, member meetings, and election. And with this shift comes increased scrutiny on the security of these environments. Digital trust is no longer a luxury, it's a baseline expectation. And so I'm Sylvie Arton. I will be your host for today, and I'm joined by someone who brings deep technical expertise to this conversation, Mark Harper, Chief Technology Officer at Lumi Global. Mark, over to you for a quick introduction. Let us know how you got involved in the general area of security and high-stake meetings. Welcome.
Thank you, Sylvie. And first of all, thank you to everyone that's joined. I can see from the attendee list, this was a popular meeting, and I'm going to put that down to security and not your host today. I think it's a timely topic. I think we see it in the news constantly at the moment with cyber incidents across the world, and I would imagine that's one of the reasons that you're here today. So my background, I've always had a passion in security. My master's degree was in IT security, and I've spent the last 2 decades working for a number of retailers, implementing secure credit card management platforms, and then subsequently working in public sector for military, centralized government, and then public safety solutions. So all of that blended particularly well when I joined Lumi in 2021. I've just passed my 4-year anniversary at the beginning of the month and thoroughly enjoy the thousands of meetings that we deliver constantly across the globe. So I'm fortunate enough to join a couple of them each week. So it's great to see so many of your familiar names on the attendee list today. And
we are so lucky to have you, Mark. But before we begin today's discussion, I'd like to go over a few typical housekeeping items. First, the session is recorded and the link will be shared with each of you afterwards. You'll receive it via email. So please keep an eye out for your inbox. Please participate throughout by submitting your questions or comments via the messaging tab of the platform. We really want to make sure this is an interactive session, so please feel free to ask any questions you may have. And then finally, we will conclude today's webinar with a survey. We kindly request you to fill the survey. It helps us plan future webinars and ensure that we always deliver high quality content relevant to your needs. And the link to the survey can be found on the right-hand panel of the webinar platform under survey. So why don't we get started in our discussion? So first, we will start with the why. Why digital trust is now a non-negotiable. And so obviously, I will turn the question to you, Mark. From your perspective as a CTO, why is digital trust so foundational, is such a foundational issue to high-stake governance meetings and elections?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Sylvie. I believe that everyone on the call here can appreciate, whilst your shareholders are looking for features to make sure the meeting is engaging, the reality is, from an AGM perspective, so the CorpSecs, for IR meetings, for the IROs, and for the membership meetings, so sporting federations, housing associations, forums, the paramount requirement here is security. Now, I see from clients that I work with day in, day out, that security is paramount. I spend an awful lot of time with CISOs walking through the need that you require to assure yourselves internally, but also your shareholders and members, that the data that they have is maintained securely, and that the votes that they put forward for their motions are valid and counted, and these have not been interfered with external vectors. I think the key message there is, for us, the platform is highly secure. It has to be. And that really does drive forward the message that you can go out to your members with confidence to say the meeting is valid and the content is secure.
And this is particularly, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mark.
No, please go, Sylvie.
I was going to say there's really 2 drivers here. One is the high-stake meetings that your platform, Mark, covers. So you mentioned it, AGM, investor relations meeting, big important election, but also the environment in which we operate, where with the cybersecurity risk that exists for all organizations today.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a multi-tiered challenge. I see security as it's an architecture within the platform. It's not a nice to have. It's an absolute necessity, and we've built the platform bottom up on that ground. The evolution, and I'm certainly some of the questions from the individuals will address this coming up, but it's an ever-evolving threat. Here in the UK, we're on the BBC website constantly seeing the news, and I would imagine that's reflected elsewhere, that the cyber risk is exponential to any organization. And as we have a duty to our clients, we have to invest constantly to make sure that we're at the front foot of this.
So based on your experience, Mark, can you share some of the emerging risk or vulnerabilities organizations face when security isn't built into these digital meeting environment, when it's not native to the environment?
Yeah, sure, certainly. I'd pick out two examples. One that all clients across the world with their own websites, in addition to the Lumi voting platform, is denial of service. This is typically, I think long term, it was the belief that it was an individual in their bedroom rigging up servers to create bots. It's not. This is state-funded, typically state-funded groups that are there to disrupt, impact share value if they can. So that is something that we are very conscious of and have invested heavily to protect. But there's also the in-room, what we call hacktivists. These are typically for an on-prem meeting or in-room. This is where you have the individuals that are there to portray a message of disappointment or anger to a board. And it could be related to business practices in certain territories across the globe, or naturally their business line. We work with many high-profile companies that work in the energy sector, or financiers, which tend to be a target. For us, I think it's key to remind everyone that the online capability provides you with more resilience than your in-room offering. In-room, once the individual has the microphone, or as a lector, there's very little you can do other than to eject them, which doesn't look good on the broadcast. Where for in-room, if they're there, you have full control to be able to eject them virtually and quickly, or if you wish, the ability to silence their messages so that they are still able to send their messages through, but it doesn't disrupt your broadcast. So it gives your board or your top table the ability to rest at ease, to know that you're moderating it. So we are very open to how you run your meetings. The platform is heavily customizable to suit, but it's important that people understand that you've got that control.
Well, this is great. This is a great, actually, foundation for the rest of the conversation, because now we have a really good understanding of why that matters. What I'd like to kind of move the conversation around, to is the stakeholder view, right? What's really at risk? So whether you're working with investor relations teams, boards, or member-based organizations, expectation for secure participation are high, and rightly so. I think we discussed why. But different stakeholders have different concerns, shaped by what's at stake for them. So I guess, Mark, let's look at investor relations first. What are the biggest security concerns from an IR standpoint, and how do they relate to reputation and market confidence?
Yeah, very good question, Sylvie. So from an IR perspective, the driver for those meetings is share price. And for everyone involved, the risk is the share valuation should a meeting be disrupted or compromised in any way, shape, or form. And I think that erodes confidence, which is a real challenge. It's a potential risk for clients. I think the true challenge there with an IR meeting, typically these are open to public, again, based on the client's requirements. It's not a register based like it would be for a shareholder meeting. So again, it's the ability for IROs to validate the individuals that are present. Are they valid? And having the ability to, again, eject them if need be, but also to ensure that the information that we hear and broadcast is encrypted and securely stored so it doesn't leak into the public domain outside of the scope of where the IRO wishes for it to land. This is why I think oh, sorry, Sylvia, please.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, that's why I think purpose-built platforms, they're not just a compliance measure, they are a strategic necessity.
Because to your point, it goes to the heart of trust and perception, and that comes with high reputational risk, especially in the context of an investor relations meeting. So on the other hand, though, when we think about AGM and corporate secretary, these teams and member organization often deal with voting access, and you mentioned that earlier, and participation equity. How does digital security protect fairness in those settings? Because their requirement is slightly different than the IROs.
Yeah, and certainly. So from a voting meeting, it is maintained from a register. And in there, and if I take an AGM, we've delivered a few more of those today. Those AGMs will have a register. In there will be the shareholders with their shareholding, their quantity. And what we need to ensure is that the person representing that share is the individual that the invitation was meant for. I think it's a very different challenge from an IR meeting, because here this is where you are changing or making decisions for organizations based on the individuals that are present. We have the ability, obviously, to manage the vote securely, which is paramount, and also for the export for anonymity, if this is required. We work with scrutineers across the globe, and we allow individuals and companies to audit how we operate. I checked actually before I joined the call, 38 in the last 12 months, 38 companies have been here working through to validate. But I think it's providing that level of reassurance that only those individuals entitled to vote are in the platform and are casting their vote.
Because that goes directly to being able to verify, an outcome or ensure some kind of authenticity of the outcome. And therefore, that's very important for the corporate secretary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It underpins not just data protection, but it's democratic fairness as well.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So we talked about why it's important, what really is at risk. Oftentimes, when we speak about security to our customers, there's always a concern about security, slowing down or creating blocks. Not so much slowing down, but creating blocks. So security, as I mentioned, is often seen as a barrier to seamless participation, right? When built correctly, it should do the opposite. It should be not a competitive advantage, but enabling smooth, fast meeting without friction. So why do you think, Mark, that the myth persists that secure systems are clunky? And what's the risk with holding onto that mindset? It doesn't have to be difficult, in other words. Security doesn't have to be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why?
I think the myth exists based on legacy platforms where security has been bolted on, so not as part of the core design and implementation. And naturally, when you add additional solutions on, there is always a challenge with integrations and the X number of seconds that takes. I think for modern platforms that are built bottom up, where trust is at the core, multi-factor is available for authentication for administrators, so you know who your moderators are and your scrutineers have access. Real-time data encryption makes a significant difference. But it also ensures that security isn't an afterthought. Obviously, there's a risk there of data leaks and unauthorized access. But I think if you build this into the core of the solution, then speed doesn't become a challenge or a restricting factor to participants joining.
I guess that's the difference between being security native from the bottom up and not, which creates the obstacle. That makes sense. In that context, Mark, would you share some examples of Lumi security infrastructure like authentication or encrypted data flows that allows for speed without sacrificing confidence?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's I'm going to be a good chap here and obviously be careful what I say, because we are assuming that everyone on the call is who they say they are, is not a bad actor. Encryption, absolutely. So we have encryption from the participant's browser and an admin's browser down to the database. We encrypt everything in transit. We encrypt at rest. Our data retention period is very short. So typically, again, if I take an AGM, we receive the share book usually the day before. It's encrypted, secure file transfer. We upload it, conduct the meeting, and then work with a scrutineer to pass that back to the client, and then it's deleted. But we also, it's I think we touched upon risks earlier on. I think the important point, and any good provider should be doing this, the platforms are monitored 24/7, not just from our own internal DevOps teams, but we work with tooling partners across the globe to conduct constant scans across the environment to make sure that nothing looks out of the ordinary. It can be cumbersome to work through the logs, but it's important because really that's our first line of defense against the open public, the public being bad actors. So that's included in our design. And again, constant delivery. We're releasing frequently. So fresh code is in line with the latest OAuth standard, so we know it's guaranteed. We work with a third party. They conduct independent penetration tests against all new features on the platform each month. So they're CREST approved. And again, that's really a driver for financial institutions that require that validation. And the fact that we're able to do this frequently means there's very little findings that we have to act upon. It's not like there is a great period between releases where vulnerabilities that it evolves every day. We have platforms monitoring for trends across the globe. So it's important that we understand what those latest threats are and how we can quickly mitigate them if they do exist in any of the architecture, so that we have almost like a zero-day risk.
So this is interesting what you said, Mark, because you said two concepts that to me are probably takeaways here. One is security as a native application, part of the core build from the bottom up. But also you talked about security is not a one and done. Security is something that is part of your DNA that you manage and monitor over time. So in this context, where I'd like to move the conversation to is how to choose a secure meeting platform. So because you mentioned it, that not all platforms are built with governance in mind. And if you're selecting a meeting or an election providers to support your investor meeting, AGM, and member election, you need to know what to ask and what standards to demand.
Yep.
So then in this context, Mark, when choosing a meeting platform, what should organization ask for, look for in terms of end-to-end encryption, real-time data protection, and live voting accuracy? What should they be asking of their partners?
So a key couple of points there, Sylvie. So end-to-end encryption is fundamental. You need to ensure that the data in all elements of the platform, from participants' device all the way through to the database, is encrypted. In terms of, if I follow on your question there about the requirements and standards, so the default is ISO 27001. You have to have that. That's a validation from an external auditor to ensure that the platform meets, and there's about 114 odd requirements. It's not something you can sign off yourself. It has to be done externally. But really the gold standard is SOC 2 Type 2. So it's the flagship compliance standard. It verifies that your platform is secure, not just on the day of test, but you have to provide your evidence periodically through the annual assessment period. The auditors are on site, and it's for them to unpick all of your processes, demonstrate evidence for how the encryption is configured. And it's when you've got that external verification and validation that this is all intact and to the standard, that's really when you know you have a platform that you can be aware of is secure in all elements.
So it's interesting because you're sort of overlapping with my next question, which is all about SOC 2 and Type 2. Because I guess the context behind this is I think for the most part, people are aware of this requirement, but it's often misunderstood. Can you explain beyond what you just mentioned, what it means and why it should be a baseline and why it's misunderstood?
Yeah, so I think, so probably now 4 or 5 years ago, this was driven from North America, and it was a requirement from our clients in US and Canada, but it was really, it's only Middle East that started to pick this up potentially, I say maybe 2 years ago now. For us, we've gone through, I think, 320 odd audits now in the last 4 years. SOC 2 is the primary driver. So when we're able to share that report or the findings within the report so that people can verify what we actually say, it's that gives that gold standard approval. It's a comprehensive assessment. I think the audit process takes us best part of 4 weeks each time, every 3 months. And then it goes off to so our auditor's assessment team there for external validation on top of the auditor's view. So it really is comprehensive and it ticks every single box of requirement. But we are seeing that now as the leading badge of honor across all territories in which we operate.
And I think the fact that it's now almost a global standard speaks to itself as well, right? For itself as well.
Yeah, and I think it's not just security, because it covers availability, confidentiality, privacy. So there are whole elements that all combined provides everyone with the reassurance that we're looking for internally, because it's an external validation and verification, but also provides you with the assurance.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I guess, especially in the context of, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or even longer, security was confined to in-person meeting. But today, security is not confined only to in-person. You have obviously the virtual component, you have the hybrid component, and you have the in-person. So in this context, do security requirements change across these different formats, in-person, virtual, and hybrid? And how should organization adapt their approach?
Yeah, so I think it's it's a very useful and timely point. I think we're seeing more individuals switch to online. There are some territories that are still predominantly in room. The in room poses a different threat, or a challenge. Typically, again, if there's power issues, we can run from batteries. That's absolutely fine. But you have to be conscious that individuals are there for a different reason. They're typically there in room to confront the board over business practice, as where virtual platforms, really, that's their only way of interacting with the board. So they come there with an intention that they cannot simply walk up to the lector. So how can we disrupt? I think we see that also from groups. I'm not going to name any of them for their own publicity, but there are groups that out there deliberately targeting retail sector, for example, banking sector, to impact flow. And I see it now, Village Shop, empty shelves at the moment because of challenges that have happened with retailers. I think the flow from in-room to virtual means that you're there for everyone to see. So as such, the element of security has to be higher. In room, you've already got your physical security, you've got barriers at the door. So it's us providing a virtual equivalent to those. So that's where the scope is slightly different. And then for a hybrid, we've got the view of both. We have to provide the same room security in room as we do for online.
And I think that makes the point for security native, right? Because that platform becomes the core of the experience, whether you're hybrid or virtual or in person. And so it's really important that security be built from the ground up in that context. So we're in the section around choosing a secure meeting platform. We talked about some of the criteria that these customers should be using, but are there other standards or controls organizations should consider when evaluating platforms?
Yeah, I think again, if you were looking at say public style elections, then we have to go for Cyber Essentials Plus. Probably not applicable for AGM and IR meetings, but again, it's just that additional level of validation. It comes from a different perspective from testing, but really the two that we're looking for is ISO 27001 and then absolutely SOC 2 Type 2. Okay, that makes sense. So we talked, I think the conversation on next section is really going to be focused on visibility and control access throughout the meeting lifecycle. So true governance demands visibility before, during, and after the meeting. It's not just about securing the moment, but securing the process end to end. So in that context, Mark, how does Lumi Global give compliance, cyber, and risk teams full oversight of what's happening at each stage of the meeting, from registration to post-meeting reporting, in the entire meeting life cycle? Okay, yeah. So for simplicity purposes, I'm going to merge all meeting types into one here. So AGMs, IR, and membership. So it is not uncommon for us to be running scheduled voting or pre-voting of a meeting. This can be open for hours, days, weeks, potentially. During that period, we allow individuals, so allocated personas from a company, to access the platform. And we have certain meeting stages, so pre-meeting, live meeting, early bird. And in there, you can see who has accessed the platform and how they have potentially pre-voted, if that's been their objective, or any pre-messages or questions they would have raised and submitted. But you have full coverage. So in here, you're able to see the movements and selections made by individual, and it's possible they can come back through multiple stages of the meeting. In other regions, if I take Middle East, in UAE, where Lumi is also the provider for the validation of shareholders. So we will go through individual calls with people to validate their national identification, and then able to submit them into a meeting, clear that they are the participants that have been registered. Same in Belgium. So in Belgium, we go through 5 checks per each individual based on national identification, any passports, for example. Again, that's quite a niche market that we have this in, but I think it just demonstrates the level of security and validation we can go through, all the way to the opposite end, where for a housing association meeting, it's typically, these are neighborhoods, so the access requirements are lowered. So we try to cater for all of these solutions. I think the fact that we can demonstrate and audit the reports, and we've delivered some of the largest AGMs in the last few weeks across the world, and with the scrutineers, we're able to show point by point how people selected their votes, any messages, any documents they've read, so you have that full audit of their experience in the platform.
That's really interesting. I think my next question you've covered a little bit, but I'll ask nevertheless, in case there's other aspect that we can cover. So Mark, can you walk us through how Lumi handles access control? You've talked about it, moderation, and post-meeting data integrity in a way that supports confident decision-making.
Yes.
So I know you talked about access control, but let's dive into post-meeting data integrity and other aspects.
Yeah, certainly. So post-meeting, for simplicity, I'll go with an AGM here that's had a number of resolutions. Your participants, your shareholders have logged into the platform and cast their vote, and the voting has been closed. At this point, this is where we need to demonstrate and reassure everyone that the votes are counted and that we have a quorum to match the register. From here, we can show who has voted in which direction, and then a mathematical calculation to validate that. We typically, if I take one of the larger organizations, we will have maybe a scrutineer in the studio with us here, or we would share a device with them in the venue if it's a third-party site. We would go through that process. They would cross-check all of the voting activity, how many people are due to vote, what's the shareholding, how many resolutions have passed. They go through, sign off one by one. We then provide this as a digital extract to the scrutineer, and then they would pass it on to the third party. We then provide them with a copy of the raw data behind that so that they've got that themselves to interrogate should they need to in the future. But I think it's just providing that check, cross-check, cross-check.
Yeah, that comprehensive oversight of the entire process.
Yes.
Well, this is great, great discussion, Mark. We waited too long to have you on camera with us.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I think we're ready to take a few questions from our audience. In fact, we have many of them lining up in our Q&A. But before we move to the live Q&A, just a quick reminder to please fill out the short survey by accessing the survey tab of the webinar platform, and please click on the submit button to submit your response. So your feedback, as I mentioned, helps us inform the topics that we want to discuss in future webinar. Okay, so first question for the audience. Sylvie mentioned emerging risk early in this session, but can you explain which sources you use to ensure that you are always aware of the latest threat?
Happy to reveal some of them, but not all of them, obviously, because again, we don't want to give away too much. So we do. We're tightly connected to the security sphere. So here we are registered with the National Cyber Security Centre from British government. so we're aware of any risks in the UK in particular. We partner with a number of security agencies, and we have live feeds to all vulnerability databases across the world, and these are changing by the minute. So we have a live feed. We are scanning the platforms constantly, so if there is any challenges against that latest update, then we're able to address that very quickly. For some clients that are particularly security savvy, they typically reach out to us a few weeks ahead of the meeting, and then they will give us any insight that they're aware if there are going to be any activists in the room, or if there are going to be groups that they need to be conscious of. We will work. We got three. I'm in the UK. We're in the 3 studios here, but we will come to site and we will work with your security team, so you have full access to the platform behind the scenes for your meeting, and we will work collaboratively to see if there are any unusual individuals on the call. And then, but Lumi doesn't take the call. I'm very clear. If they're a shareholder, it is for the clients yourselves to validate that you wish to have these people moved to the side, to put it nicely. But we are working with a number of global partners constantly to ensure that any evolving risk is flagged to us very quickly.
Okay. So our next question from the audience: how do you manage data residency and privacy requirements across jurisdiction?
Okay.
Apology for my diction.
Yeah. So how do you okay. So we host across a number of geographic regions. So at the moment there are 8 regions that we host in. We have data sovereignty requirements in certain jurisdictions, Singapore, Australia, Canada, to name 3. With those clients, it is a contractual obligation from Lumi to ensure that the data is housed within the borders of their country, which we're absolutely comfortable doing so. There are some clients that require additional validation for who has access to the platforms. So the tech team at Lumi, we are dotted across the globe. So it is possible for clients to stipulate, actually, this must be maintained from North America, for example, then we can accommodate there. And then for the privacy requirements, so we maintain to GDPR standards, the Swiss equivalent, the German equivalent. So yeah, I'm comfortable with the requirements there. Again, if there are any locations that people are interested in, I can actually go out and explain where we are hosted. But yeah, we'll certainly tick off. I think we deliver in 60 odd countries this year. I hope that answers your question. So if it doesn't, please let me know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Well, and I was going to say to the audience, if you, after this webinar is completed, come up with a question we didn't answer, please reach out. We would be happy to answer any questions you may have during or after the webinar.
And
the next question is about...
feel free to email me directly as well, if anyone wants to speak.
My next question is about if a client of ours, or if anyone require copies of any accreditation documents, either SOC 2 or other, would there be an associated cost with getting this report?
Okay, so Kemi Adejuro is our head of information security. She works tirelessly responding back to these requests. As I say, it's more than 30 so far in the last 12 months. We do not charge for this. So we will happily answer and respond to any due diligence questionnaires that you have. They typically ask the standard questions. What's your encryption level? Can you demonstrate this? Yes, we can. But if needed, we can always provide our ISO certificate, extract from the SOC 2 Type 2 report, and also our ISO certification from UK government. But yeah, we can provide that.
This is fantastic. This is great. So this was a very engaging conversation, Mark, and very insightful, especially in such an important topic of security. Before we close today's webinar, I have one final question for you. Okay. If you had to leave our audience with just 3 takeaways after this webinar about running secure high-stake meetings, what would they be? What should they leave this webinar with?
3 of them. So number 1, I would say make sure that you are aware of your platform, whatever platform you're currently using, the certification behind it. Secondly, I would make sure that you are comfortable that that has been independently assessed by an accreditor, and you're not just taking a person's view for it. And well, the third one, I would probably say this, actually advice for yourselves actually. Don't underestimate the security risk of people. So you will see in the headlines that most breaches and vulnerabilities are not through sophisticated attacks, they are through human error. So for your own security, make sure that you are certainly patching your platforms and training your staff constantly as to phishing attacks or smishing if they're going to be targeted. Again, it's something we do. Everyone at Lumi has to be trained, and we conduct tests frequently. But take away that, make sure you protect your own platforms as much as we do.
Yeah. And social engineering is a very important topic in security. Yeah. With that, that concludes our webinar today. Mark, it was such a pleasure having you on this webinar. We waited way too long. We're going to need to make sure that you're a regular guest of our webinar series. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's always a pleasure.
Sorry, Sylvie, another just about to close. There's another question just come in.
Oh, okay. My question is about security. What is the data retention period post meetings? Are the meetings IDs maintained beyond the retention period, and who has access to this data?
Got a couple of questions in there then. So what is the data retention period? Okay, so this differs. It differs within by region, and it also differs by client. So our typical approach is that we hand the data back to you as quickly as we can once the meeting is concluded. There are clients that insist that we maintain the data for longer periods, which we do. But typically our data retention period is usually 48 hours. Are the meeting IDs maintained beyond the retention period, and who has access to them? So some of the meeting IDs are retained. Again, typically the meeting is completed and deleted. Some clients ask us to retain the meeting and then embed that within their own platform so that investors or shareholders can go back and watch the recording. For clients that have requested that, then there is obviously a commercial agreement between us to manage that. Who has access to this data? So the data then would be minimized in that environment. I'm taking a client here that wants to view the platform post a meeting. It would be stripped down to someone at Lumi within the territory that would be managing your meeting for you, and then typically one or two individuals within the client's scope that they would like to be those meeting managers. I'm hoping that answers the question. Questions?
I think so.
Yeah, thank you for raising that.
Make sure that's right. This time around we've covered everything, but if we haven't, please don't feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to address any additional questions. And now it's true, we are going to conclude the webinar. A big thank you to everyone for joining us. A special thank you again to Mark for being such an amazing host or guest to us.
One thing, Sylvia, it's an open invite for me. If anyone on the call wishes to have a one-to-one call with me to go through this in more detail, then yeah, please do let me know and I'll happily join a call with you or your security teams.
And the last little ask for me, please remember to complete the survey. It's very important to us to deliver content that is valuable to you, so your feedback is very important. Thank you, everyone, again. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.
Thank you all.